I'm David Lennonhawk, and this is Dave's Film Faves. Alright, I said I was going to do at least four horror movies in the month of October. I'm getting there. This week, we do Martyrs, the French horror film from 2008. It was part of a new wave of French extreme cinema called New French Extremity, which isn't completely based on horror films, but horror films make up a lot of them. I'm even wearing a shirt for a different one, Hot Tension, which was released in the US as High Tension. I might make a video about that at some point. Martyrs I've chosen to do because Martyrs is probably my pick for the best horror film of the 21st century so far, and that's why it needed to be part of this little October horror movie project that I'm doing for Dave's Film Faves. So what's the film about? Warning ahead of time, I could not find many safe for unrestricted YouTube pictures for this movie, so there's not going to be as many screen caps in this one as in the past. Anyway, the movie starts with Lucy. She's a girl, and when you first see her, she's running out of a slaughterhouse as a young kid. It appears that she was mentally and physically, but not sexually abused for quite a long time by some people, perhaps her parents. So, after she runs away, she's found by the authorities and she's put into an orphanage. While she's in the orphanage, she appears to see a sort of desiccated and partially like skin cut or flayed or ragged woman. And there's a question about whether the torture that she's had has caused her to imagine this thing or if it's some sort of supernatural entity. And whatever it is, Lucy ends up getting damage on her body, cuts and things of that nature. While in the orphanage, she does make friends with a young girl named Anna, and that's going to come into play in a little bit. I'll mention about the desiccated woman figure that it's probably a play on some of the J-horror tropes about the, like your Grudge or Ring, long black hair kind of girls, but it's done in a much better way. People who know me will know that I despise J-horror with the exception of the occasional Takashi Miike film, Ringu, Ju-on, and the American remakes. I fucking hate them. I think they're horrible. So this was sort of the French good or better version of doing this for this desiccated figure thing. And what this thing is revealed to be is much better than just some ghost who's taking revenge or some bullshit. Anyway, we cut to about 15 years later. We are shown a happy upper middle class French family preparing for breakfast. You got a husband, you got a wife, and you got a male and a female child who are about teenage years, I think. So they're getting out to breakfast. There's a ring of the doorbell, and then the father goes to open it, and he's immediately blasted away with a shotgun. Funny story, when writing my own like horror ideas and stuff, I always imagine starting a story with just a family, whatever, and then some random stranger just comes with a shotgun and blows them away. I thought that would be an interesting way to begin a horror story. But Martyrs took it for the beginning of their first act proper because the stuff with kids, I guess you could call a prologue. So, basically, Lucy goes through and murders this entire family with a shotgun. She's very distraught and everything, and she ends up calling Anna. Apparently they've stayed in contact. And she is almost, but not 100% sure that this family, specifically the mother and the father, were bad people who did stuff to her when she was a kid. So Anna comes over. They start to go about, should Lucy turn herself in? Are they just gonna cover up the bodies, or what are they gonna do here? And Lucy is still seeing that desiccated figure. Now, it's very, very hard to describe where this movie goes from that point. What I will say is this. The vast majority of movies that you ever go see, if you see a lot of movies, you basically know where the story's going to go. I mean, some movies have a twist ending, and some movies, throw little twists and turns or unexpected surprises in there. But you basically know a basic 3-act plot progression from any given movie that you see. If you walk into, I don't know, like Blade Runner, which was Blade Runner 2049, which was a very good recent film, horribly underrated. while there's a lot of surprises in that plot about when things are going to happen and what's going on, and there's a lot of thematic interesting stuff, you basically kind of know what the progression of this basic story is going to be about the investigation, find out the investigation, take care of the bad guys, maybe, etc. So you basically have an idea of story progression for any movie you walk into. By the end of the first act of Martyrs, I had no fucking idea where this movie was going to go. Like, alright, so that happened, where does this movie go? And I really enjoyed that from this film, that there's just really not a way to predict where the story is going at all. And the fact that this is one of the few movies that's actually surprised me on a story-wise, and not just because of a one-off twist at the end of the second act or the third act or whatever. Just, I had no idea where the story was going, like, at all. I was like, which of the like 9 different stories that exist in English literature? But I mean, it's French, but you know. So I really enjoyed that. This was a movie that surprised me, and you know, I see thousands of movies now every year. It's very hard to surprise me at this point. So, describing the rest of this movie is a bit difficult, because this is one I actually don't want to spoil. So I will say that we do find out some stuff about that family, and we find out that it links to a maybe underground, rich people, shadowy organization that has very interesting goals. And that goal is very philosophical and very metaphysical, and it's sort of about attempting to get concrete proof of things that are heretofore unprovable on basic empirical methods. And it's really just sort of about human... The film's thematic stuff is really sort of about the limits of human pain, and whether pain and adversity can lead to some sort of transcendence, and maybe if it doesn't help the person in pain, can it perhaps help others? And what are the moral implications of the search for knowledge? There is knowledge that could be very useful. It could also be very damaging to the human condition. But it's also about who has the right to extract that knowledge. So it's also sort of about the ethics of experimentation to a certain extent. And as well as the limits to what we should know. And as a person who believes that no knowledge should be off limits if it can be empirically proven, it's a very trying film, because the methods they go to for this are horrible, and the people who are benefiting from it, or benefiting, whether anybody benefits from this particular knowledge is arguable. Why is it just chosen by this certain class of people who now have access to it, or would have had access to it if other events did not? And also, it makes you wonder, why did the knowledge of this cause certain people to do certain things? Like, later we're introduced to a character who's only known as Mademoiselle, and she explains things, and then later she makes a choice that she doesn't quite explain, and it opens up a lot of questions about whether what we've learned was good or horrible. It's very hard to describe this movie without spoiling it. I will say that this is a film that is not for the faint of heart in the slightest bit. In fact, this Blu-ray copy is from Canada. It was not released on Blu-ray in the United States. It was only released on DVD because in the US it was released by Dimension Films. And if you've been following the news lately, Dimension Films is owned by the Weinstein Company. And even before all that shit with Harvey Weinstein came out, and film people kind of knew the basics about this stuff anyway, Harvey Weinstein is a piece of shit. When even, aside from the rapist shit, he really fucked over a lot of movies, and part of that was not releasing good movies in the way that they deserve to be released, or recutting movies without filmmakers' consent or voice. And I mean, at least Martyrs, they did release it in its unexpurgated form in the US, but they only gave it this token DVD release. They didn't do anything. And I understand it's a foreign film. It's not going to open on 3,000 screens and do anything. It's a fairly extreme foreign horror film at that. But you compare that to Lionsgate, that, it wasn't successful at the domestic box office, but they at least dubbed a French film and tried to give it a wide release, as opposed to Dimension, which just dumps things on DVD, doesn't even give it a proper Blu-ray release. But I got this Blu-ray from the Canadian company, because Amazon.ca sometimes stuff comes on Blu-ray in Canada that doesn't come here, especially foreign films and especially French films. And the top has this little warning on it, which you probably won't be able to read from this, but it basically says, this movie contains scenes of violence and horror that may provoke feelings of disgust, repulsion, or fear. And this did premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, and there were reports of people vomiting and all that kind of stuff and walking out. But there's also less severe horror films that also have that effect on people. I recently watched the French Extremity film Raw, about the female vegetarian who becomes sort of a cannibal thing. And that movie supposedly caused people to vomit and pass out, and I didn't find it... I liked the film, but it's certainly not up to the level of Martyrs. Well, most horror movies are not up to the level of Martyrs, or High Tension, or even some of the lower ilk, like Inside or Frontiers. Inside I really like, and Frontiers I appreciate more than I like, but they're not up at the higher level of these films. But it's both not as gory as you would expect, but it's also much more intense than you would expect. This is not a film I normally recommend to people who maybe only like studio horror movies, or maybe just stumble upon some mamby-pamby Netflix stuff that's kind of okay. Like, there are artsy horror films, or very good horror movies that are not quite mainstream, that I would recommend to the average horror goer if they also have taste. It Follows comes to mind. This is a movie I only recommend for the hardcore horror fans, people who really like horror and want to be exposed to things they've never heard of. These are the kind of thing that I give to people who would go to a horror convention to get like B-movie actors to sign things. This isn't for people who, they consider themselves cultured because they watched The Babadook and got that it was about postpartum depression and stuff. So I'm recommending this with that caveat. If you do not like horror films, or you only like mainstream horror films, probably not for you. If you like horror movies and you want to expand your knowledge, especially of modern horror, because as I've said in other videos and blog posts, modern horror is not in the best state for theatrical releases, so you have to seek out things in other forms. Definitely recommend picking up Martyrs. You can get the Blu-ray fairly cheaply from Amazon in Canada. I think the American Amazon you can buy from a third-party seller as well, but I just went to Amazon CA. You pay an import tax, it's fine. And there is the DVD which you can get pretty cheaply, but come on, go blue or go home. Until they get a 4K release, and I don't think we're getting a 4K release of this. There was an American remake of this. I have not watched it. I've heard mediocre to bad things about it. I do plan to seek it out of curiosity's sake eventually, but I have not seen it, so I can't comment on that. But I'm pretty sure even if it turns out to be surprisingly good, it's not going to be to the level of this. I'm one of the few people who is kind of okay with the American remake of Oldboy. Doesn't hold a candle to the South Korean one, and Oldboy will probably get its own video at some point here. I know the director of this, Patrick, I'm going to butcher the name, Laugier, something along those lines. He recently directed a Jessica Biel movie that got bad reviews that I didn't see. He was on deck to do a remake of Clive Barker's Hellraiser a couple years ago, where he was going to really delve into like the homosexual BDSM culture, the stuff that Clive Barker was just sort of getting around the edges of, but was, he couldn't quite get there because of, where we were in the 1980s. So he really wanted to explore in more explicit detail the themes that movie kind of skirts around the edges and the undersurface of. But Dimension, again, those fuckers, the Weinsteins, they own the rights to Hellraiser, and they wanted something a bit more mainstream and teen-friendly for Hellraiser, and Hellraiser was never Freddy or Jason. Hellraiser, they tried to do it with Hellraiser 3 and Bloodlines and stuff, but that's not what Hellraiser is. So it's a shame that Dimension fucked that up and then decided to replace Douglas Bradley with a pinhead who looks like he ate too many peanut M&Ms for really bad, like, ash can releases to keep the rights. But I digress. Dimension Films fucking sucks, and any good movie that's come out of Dimension Films has just been out of an accident. I really fucking hate Dimension and the Weinsteins. And now, not just as movie people, now I just hate them as human beings. That's about all I can say about that, so I know I've been very vague. It's a very extreme film, excellent, also very intelligent. Please, if you like this kind of thing, check out Martyrs. Couple notes here. So, I have not had a day off from either of my two jobs in the entire month of October. So that is why these videos have been further and fewer than I've expected for this month, but I do want to get at least 4 horror movie reviews in the month of October, even if I have to like double up on a day. Then I'll probably take a tiny break at the beginning of November just to reset before I get back into non-horror days film favorite reviews. That's that. There's a couple other things. I have taken a couple vacation days off at the end of October, and while I have a few things planned for those days, like binge-watching Stranger Things 2 and going to see Little Shop of Horrors Fathom event at the theater, I'm going to try and get a couple other little Halloween Nugget surprise videos up there. No promises on that. But that's where I am right now. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for all of you who were concerned that I ate 3 Carolina Reaper chips and almost died, and that's all I gotta say.